I am Claire Donovan, a retired logistics officer in the United States Army. For years, I believed that the discipline carved into me by the military would be enough to carry me through any storm life could throw my way. I had faced deployments in the Middle East, nights when the desert swallowed every sound except the steady thrum of fear and duty. I had watched friends fall, had learned how to survive with grit and quiet faith. Yet nothing on the battlefield prepared me for the moment I saw my own name on a legal document that I had never signed. My signature stared back at me in careful strokes, a false witness to a fraud that cut to the bone of everything I had fought to protect. That forged line on a piece of paper threatened not only my future, but the honor I had once sworn to defend. Before we dive deeper into this story, I want to ask something small of you. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Military Revenge, but only if stories of courage and resilience speak to you. This channel is a place where we honor the unseen battles of veterans, where we carry forward the quiet strength of those who served. And if you can, share in the comments where you are listening from and what hour it is in your corner of the world. It is always moving to see how far these stories travel, how voices echo across time zones, binding strangers through shared truth and compassion. When I first noticed that forged signature, I thought it was a clerical mistake, a slip of the pen, a misfiled page, but the truth was far darker. The name attached to the deception was Richard, my brother-in-law, the man my sister Margaret had trusted until the day she died of heart failure. I had grieved her, believed that chapter was closed, only to find myself dragged into a maze of lies she never saw coming. What started as one suspicious document unraveled into a scheme that wound its way through shell companies, real estate deals, and laundered money crossing borders. Investigators traced threads that led to a network the FBI had been watching for months, and suddenly I was no longer just a grieving sister or a retired soldier trying to live quietly. I became a witness, a target, and a test of whether my loyalty to truth could withstand the weight of family betrayal. That is where my story begins, a forged line of ink, a family tie twisted into a weapon. And the long march that followed, not across foreign soil, but through courtrooms and interrogations, through nights when the walls closed in and silence felt heavier than artillery fire. Stay with me, because this is not only a story of crime and deceit. It is a story about love that survives loss, about courage that grows stronger when tested, and about the way a soldier's code of honor can guide us even in the darkest battles of civilian life. I used to think my life could be divided neatly into two parts, the years in uniform and the years after. The Army trained me to keep records, to measure supply lines and fuel loads, to make sure every convoy carried what it needed. Everything was ordered, accounted for, written down in black ink. Civilian life, I believed, would follow the same rules. Paychecks in, bills out, maybe a mortgage someday. I did not anticipate that my own handwriting would become evidence, that my name could be lifted and used like a stolen weapon. When I came home from deployment, Margaret met me at the airport with arms that trembled around me. She was smaller than I remembered, not in height but in spirit, as if the years had pressed her down. She had a boy clinging to her leg, my nephew, whose eyes were as wide as the desert moon. I had missed his first words, his first steps, missed the 1,000 little moments that stitch a childhood together. Standing there in baggage claim with the smell of burnt coffee in the air, I promised myself I would never let him feel abandoned again. Margaret was already struggling then. Her husband, Richard, worked in real estate, but his commissions came in waves. Some months they lived comfortably. Other months she called me with her voice tight and thin, asking if I could cover the power bill or a late car payment. I never told her no. My Army pay was steady, and I had no family of my own. No children waiting at home for me. Sending money felt less like charity and more like duty. She was my sister. That little boy was my blood. I remember writing letters from Iraq in the flickering light of a headlamp, folding them with hands still shaking from the sound of mortars outside the wire. I would tell her about the stars that seemed closer than they should be, about the dust that coated everything, about the way soldiers laughed too loudly after patrol to convince themselves they were still alive. But between those words, I always slid in reassurance. I told her not to worry about the bills piling up. I told her I had her back, just like when we were kids and she scraped her knees on the gravel road behind our house. The army taught me to be precise, but with family, my promises were more like vows carved into stone. I sent money through transfers that showed up on her account like lifelines. Sometimes it was for school clothes, sometimes for a mortgage payment that threatened to swallow her. Each time she would call me after the money arrived and say the same words, "You are the wall still standing." I clung to that sentence, though I never told her that being the wall was exhausting. Walls do not lean on anyone, they simply hold until they crack. Those years after my discharge felt quieter than war, but not easier. I tried to settle into civilian work. I picked up shifts at a logistics firm. The kind of job where people complained about printer paper running low and thought it was a crisis. I smiled and nodded, but inside I carried the weight of every convoy manifest I had ever signed. Compared to the lives that once depended on my calculations, these office deadlines felt hollow. The only thing that kept me tethered was Margaret and her son. When the boy turned 10, Margaret threw a party with balloons tied to the mailbox and a cake that leaned slightly to the left. She pulled me aside when the candles had been blown out and whispered that she would never have made it without me. I looked at her then and saw lines on her face that had not been there when we were girls, but also a fire in her eyes that reminded me of the sister who once dared me to climb the highest branch of the oak tree in our yard. I told her she was stronger than she knew. She shook her head. "No, Claire, you are the strong one, you always have been." Looking back, I see how I wrapped my identity around that role. Being the strong one was how I justified the years I had lost overseas, how I forgave myself for missing birthdays and Christmas mornings. If I could keep my sister afloat, then maybe my service had not stolen everything from me. Maybe it had given me purpose instead. I never imagined that the man she married, the one who toasted her with champagne at their wedding and promised to take care of her, would one day weaponize my loyalty. At that time, Richard seemed like an ordinary brother-in-law. He was charming enough, a little too polished, with a handshake that lasted a second too long. I brushed it off. People in sales always seemed a little rehearsed to me. He talked about closing deals, about market trends, about how the housing boom was making everyone rich. I nodded but never trusted his grin. Margaret believed in him though, and for her sake I held my tongue. The last time I spoke to Margaret before her surgery, she told me again that I was the wall. Her voice was tired, worn from nights awake coughing, but she tried to sound brave. She said she would come through fine, that the doctors knew what they were doing. I told her I would be there when she woke up, that I would sit in the waiting room until the nurse called my name. She laughed softly and told me not to waste a day off work, but I went anyway. Some promises are heavier than steel and you do not break them. I sat in that sterile hospital corridor, the hum of fluorescent lights above me, thinking about all the convoys I had counted through the desert. How many trucks had made it back? How many had not? I never thought the battle that mattered most would be fought on a surgical table in a civilian hospital. And when the doctor finally came out, pulling off his mask, I knew before he spoke that Margaret had lost. Grief has a sound. It is the intake of breath before the sob, the hollow ringing in your ears when the world tilts. I remember Richard collapsing into a chair, face buried in his hands. I remember the boy clutching my arm, his fingers digging in as if I were the only solid thing left. I told him it would be okay, though I did not believe it. Richard took charge of the funeral. He arranged the service, spoke to the pastor, chose the flowers. I was grateful in the moment because I was drowning in sorrow and could barely breathe. He stood at the podium and delivered a eulogy filled with anecdotes that made people laugh and cry in equal measure. For a time, I thought maybe I had misjudged him. Maybe he was truly the man Margaret believed he was. But grief can be a mask, and sometimes the mask hides something far darker than sadness. After the funeral, the house felt too quiet. Margaret's laugh had always filled the kitchen, echoing against the walls like sunlight on glass. Now the rooms held only whispers of her, the faint smell of lavender detergent on the couch, the framed photos of her boy with his missing front teeth, the half-finished crochet blanket draped across a chair. Grief makes ordinary spaces into haunted ones. I could not sit in her living room without expecting her to walk back in with a mug of tea, telling me to stop fussing and sit down. Richard kept himself busy in those days. He met with lawyers, fielded calls from the mortgage company, and told everyone he was managing fine. People praised his composure, said he was being strong for his son. I wanted to believe that. Maybe I even needed to believe it. I had enough weight to carry. And trusting that he would shoulder some of the load felt easier than letting suspicion creep in. The boy clung to me. At night he asked me to stay over, begged me not to leave when the shadows stretched long down the hallway. I lay awake on Margaret's side of the bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I could ever fill the absence that loomed so large. I promised him, just as I had promised his mother, that I would not let him feel abandoned. It was another vow carved into my bones. Richard thanked me often in those first weeks. He said he could not have handled the paperwork without me, that Margaret would have wanted me close. He poured me coffee at the kitchen table and spoke of practical matters. The insurance payout, the property taxes, the accounts that needed closing. His tone was measured, efficient, like a man who knew how to handle business. I told myself he was coping the only way he knew how, by turning grief into numbers and signatures. Yet sometimes in the late evening, I would catch him staring out the window too long, his jaw tight, eyes distant. I assumed it was sorrow, the kind that hardens instead of softens. But something about it unsettled me, like a soldier sensing a landmine beneath the sand. You do not see it, but you know it is there. I kept sending money even after Margaret's death. The boy still needed clothes, lunches, school trips. Richard never asked outright, but I could see the strain in the way he shuffled bills into drawers when he thought I was not looking. So I wired funds, telling myself it was for my nephew, not for Richard. Each transaction was a thread I spun across the gap left by my sister, trying to weave a net that would hold her child safe. There were small moments when I thought maybe we could be a family of sorts. Richard invited me to the boys' baseball games, cheering louder than anyone in the stands. He grilled hamburgers in the backyard and raised his glass to Margaret's memory. He said things like, "We will get through this, Claire." He said, "You are part of this home now." Those words slid into the cracks of my grief like warm light, and for a while I let myself believe them. But trust is a fragile thing. It does not break with a hammer blow. It erodes quietly like stone beneath dripping water. The first crack came when I noticed how often Richard was away. He said he had meetings, showings, clients to impress. Sometimes he left before dawn, returning long after the boy had gone to bed. He smelled of cologne sharper than what he used to wear. And once or twice I thought I caught a trace of whiskey on his breath. When I asked how work was going, his answers grew vague. Nothing to worry about, just deals moving slowly. I wanted to press, but the army had drilled into me the importance of chain of command, of respecting boundaries. Richard was not my soldier, not even my husband. He was family by marriage, and my loyalty to Margaret kept me from prying. Still, unease curled inside me. One evening, he dropped a thick envelope on the kitchen counter. He said it was from a client who insisted on paying in cash. He chuckled, shaking his head, and told me some people just did not trust banks. He stuffed the envelope into a drawer and changed the subject. Something about the way he handled it made my stomach tighten. Money was never just paper in my world. In the army, cash shipments were guarded by armed escorts, counted 3 times. Recorded with signatures. Here it was treated like pocket change. Margaret's words echoed in my mind. "You are the wall still standing." A wall does not crumble at the first gust of doubt, so I stayed quiet, observing, recording details in the corners of my memory like a soldier keeping a logbook. The date, the time, the expressions on his face. The boy, meanwhile, began to smile again. He talked about science projects and baseball scores. He laughed when I burned pancakes on Saturday morning, teasing that Aunt Claire should stick to army rations. His laughter was the only sound that eased the hollow in my chest. I told myself that as long as he was safe, nothing else mattered. Then came the day when Richard asked me to sign a school form for the boy. It was a simple permission slip, a field trip to the museum. I glanced down and froze. The line where my name should go looked oddly familiar, as if my signature had already been there once before. I brushed it off, telling myself I was imagining things. I signed anyway, but my hand shook. That night I pulled out old letters I had written to Margaret, the ones she had saved in a shoebox. I studied my own handwriting, the loops and angles shaped by years of filling out army forms. They were distinct, unmistakable, and the memory of that envelope of cash nagged at me like grit in a wound. Still, I stayed. I kept the routines going. I made dinners, helped with homework, kept the boys' world steady, because that was what Margaret would have wanted. And because I had made a promise, and promises were the only anchors I had left. When people spoke of Richard in town, they called him a good father. They said he had been dealt a cruel hand, losing his wife so young. They admired his strength. I smiled politely, but inside a storm gathered. I wanted to believe them, wanted to trust that he was exactly who he claimed to be. But my instincts, the same instincts that once kept me alive in war zones, whispered otherwise. I think now of those days as the calm before the storm, the moments when you can still hear birdsong before the sirens wail. I had no idea then how deep the lies ran or how far Richard would go to twist my loyalty against me. All I knew was that my sister was gone, her boy needed me, and the man who stood at the center of our fragile circle was a puzzle I could not solve. Later, when investigators asked me to describe my first suspicions, I told them about the envelope of cash, about the long absences, about the hesitation in his voice when he spoke of work. But what I remember most vividly is the way Margaret's house smelled of lavender and dust, and how I sat at her kitchen table tracing the rim of a coffee mug, feeling a shadow stretch across my heart. I did not yet know that my own name would appear on documents I had never seen. I did not yet know that the man pouring my coffee would one day stand accused of laundering money through shell companies. All I knew was that something was wrong, and that I would hold the line for as long as it took to protect the boy sleeping down the hall. That was the role I had chosen, the wall still standing, the last defense when everything else collapsed, and in time that wall would be tested in ways I could never have imagined. The first anniversary of Margaret's death arrived with the weight of a stone in my chest. Grief has a way of shifting shape. In the early days it had been raw and jagged, tearing at me with every breath. A year later it was quieter but heavier, a stone I carried everywhere, pressing into me with each step. I spent the morning at her grave, my hand resting on the cold granite etched with her name. The boy had left a baseball beside the headstone, it seems frayed from use. He whispered that he hoped she could see his games from heaven. I swallowed hard and told him she surely could. Life had rearranged itself in 12 months, as life always does. Richard went back to his business, showing homes and chasing deals. The boy settled into school, his laughter returning in small bursts, and me, I kept my promise. I showed up with groceries when their pantry looked thin. I helped with homework, attended baseball games, and tried to be the steady presence Margaret had asked me to be. The rhythm felt almost normal, though beneath it ran an undercurrent of unease I could not name. The letter from the bank arrived on a gray Tuesday, folded neatly in an envelope stamped with their insignia. At first, I assumed it was junk mail, the kind of generic correspondence banks scatter to lure customers into loans or credit cards. But when I unfolded the page, my eyes caught on the bold letters of my own name. My breath stilled. According to the letter, I had acted as a witness on a property transaction involving Richard Hale, my brother-in-law. The document claimed I had been present at the signing, had verified the authenticity of the deal, had placed my name as a safeguard of truth. I read it again and again, hoping the words would rearrange into something harmless. But there it was, my name listed as a witness. My supposed signature scrawled at the bottom. Shock moves through the body like ice water. My hands shook so hard the page rattled. I had never seen this contract before. I had never set foot in the office of the notary listed on the page, and yet there was my name, penned in a script that mimicked my own but was not mine. I carried the paper to the kitchen table and laid it flat, smoothing the creases with trembling fingers. The forged signature seemed to leer at me. It was close enough to my handwriting to fool someone who did not know better, but to me it was a grotesque imitation. The loops were too wide, the slant too sharp. It looked like a mask trying too hard to resemble a face. "This is not my signature," I whispered aloud, as if saying it could undo the lie. My voice cracked. That evening I waited for Richard to return home. The boy was in his room, headphones on, lost in music. When Richard walked into the kitchen, loosening his tie, I slid the paper across the table toward him. His eyes flicked down and then back up at me too quickly, too casually. He smiled. That smooth salesman's smile that never reached his eyes. "Just paperwork, Claire, nothing to worry about. Some deals need extra witnesses. It is standard procedure." I stared at him, disbelief hardening into anger. "My name is on a contract I never signed. That is not standard procedure. That is fraud." He lifted his hands, palms out, as if calming a skittish animal. Relax, it is just a formality. The notary must have filled in the wrong name or copied something incorrectly. These things happen. You do not need to get upset. My military training had taught me to read people under pressure, to measure the twitch of an eye, the tightening of a jaw. Richard's calm was too rehearsed. His explanation was too neat. Inside, every alarm bell I had learned to trust in combat began to blare. I folded the paper slowly and slipped it into a folder with deliberate care. My voice was steady, clipped the way it had been when I gave commands in the field. If it is a mistake, it will be easy to prove. I will contact the bank tomorrow. Richard's smile faltered for the briefest second before he recovered. He reached for his coffee cup and shrugged. Suit yourself. That night I could not sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with scenarios. If my name could be forged once, it could be forged again. What if there were more documents? What if this was bigger than one deal? The thought that my reputation, my integrity, could be entangled in lies sent my pulse hammering. By morning, I knew I needed counsel. Not family counsel, not Richard's reassurances, but someone who understood the law. I called an old colleague from my Army days, a fellow officer who had transitioned into the Judge Advocate General's Corps and now worked as a legal advisor in the civilian sector. His name was Daniel Monroe, and I trusted him with the kind of trust forged in battlefields. I met him at a quiet cafe, sliding the folded letter across the table. He adjusted his glasses and read it carefully, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. Finally, he looked up, his eyes steady on mine. Claire, this is serious. If your signature is here, the law will presume you witnessed this contract unless you can prove otherwise. My throat tightened, but I didn't. I have never seen this document before. I believe you, he said firmly, but understand this. Right now, on paper, it looks like you are tied to this transaction. If the deal is shady, you could be implicated unless we act fast. The words landed like a blow. After years of protecting supply chains, keeping meticulous records, ensuring accuracy down to the last gallon of fuel, the idea that my integrity could be questioned was unbearable. My entire career had been built on precision and honesty. Now, a forged scrawl threatened to undo it all. Daniel leaned closer. Listen to me carefully. Do not confront Richard directly. Do not accuse him in front of others. That could backfire. You need to document everything, keep copies of every communication, and contact federal investigators. This goes beyond civil law. If real estate and banking fraud are involved, the FBI needs to know. I swallowed hard. The FBI? Yes, they handle interstate fraud, forged financial documents, money laundering. If Richard is involved in something criminal, it will be their jurisdiction. But you must keep yourself clean. No rash moves. Stay disciplined the way you always were in uniform. Stay disciplined. The word struck deep. Discipline had kept me alive in Iraq when chaos threatened to consume us all. Discipline had anchored me through loss and grief. Now it would have to be my shield again. I left the cafe with the letter pressed against my chest like a secret weapon. The air outside was crisp, the sun glaring too brightly on a world that suddenly felt unstable beneath my feet. I thought of Margaret, of the trust she had placed in Richard, of the boy asleep in his room. Rage and sorrow collided in me, but beneath them both was resolve. I would not let my sister's memory be stained by deceit. I would not allow my own name to be twisted into a tool for corruption. That night, sitting alone at my desk, I began a new logbook. Old habits die hard in the Army. Every shipment had been logged, every movement tracked. Now I turned that discipline onto my own life. I recorded the date of the bank letter, the exact wording, the time I confronted Richard, the advice Daniel had given me. Each detail was inked in neat lines, a soldier's defense against the fog of war, because that was what this was, a new kind of battlefield, one without desert winds or armored convoys, but with stakes just as high. And I was determined to hold the line. The next morning, I drove to the bank branch listed in the letter. I wanted to see the contract with my own eyes to confirm whether this was truly my name or some clerical accident. The woman behind the desk, polite in a way that suggested she had repeated the same phrases 1,000 times, disappeared into a back office. When she returned, she set a photocopy before me. My stomach clenched. There it was again, my name, my supposed signature. The date placed me in that office on a day I had been hundreds of miles away, working at the logistics firm. I remembered the spreadsheets glowing on my computer screen that afternoon, the faint headache from fluorescent lights. I was not anywhere near Richard or his business dealings. The clerk tilted her head when I said the signature was not mine. She explained that once documents were notarized and filed, they carried weight. To challenge them required legal steps. Official investigations. She handed me a card with the number of their fraud department. Her smile was sympathetic, but her eyes carried a flicker of doubt. That flicker stung more than I expected. Back in my car, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. The forged signature was not just ink on paper. It was a weapon aimed at my integrity. And worse, it was a message. Someone had chosen my name deliberately, out of all possible witnesses. It was mine they had used. That was no accident. That night I confronted Richard again, this time with the photocopy. He was pouring himself a drink when I laid it on the counter. His smile flickered but returned quickly, smooth as ever. "It is nothing, Claire. These deals get messy. Sometimes notaries misfile, sometimes assistants cut corners. No one cares about the witness line. It is just formality." My voice cut sharp. Formality does not explain why my signature appears on a document I never signed. This is forgery. He raised his glass, took a slow sip, and set it down. Why make trouble? The property closed. Everyone got what they wanted. You are not hurt. Why dig into it? The calmness of his tone unsettled me more than anger would have. If he had lashed out, I would have known he felt cornered. But his smooth deflection suggested he had rehearsed this. That lies were as natural to him as breathing. I felt the boy's footsteps in the hall before I saw him. His face peeked into the kitchen, curious. I forced my voice to soften, told him everything was fine. Nodded and padded back to his room. Only then did I turn back to Richard, my jaw tight. "I am documenting everything," I said. "Every paper, every conversation. If this happens again, if my name appears where it does not belong, I will not keep quiet." He shrugged, almost bored. "Do what you have to do." Later, lying awake, I remembered Daniel's warning, "Stay disciplined, do not confront directly." I had already slipped once by showing Richard the photocopy. From here on out, I needed to play it like a mission. Observe, record, protect myself and the boy. The days that followed were laced with tension. I noticed little things I had overlooked before, envelopes arriving in thick stacks. Phone calls Richard took in hushed tones outside on the porch, business trips that pulled him away at odd hours. Each detail might have seemed ordinary in isolation. Together they painted a picture that darkened by the day. I kept my logbook faithfully. Dates, times, conversations, even the way Richard's eyes shifted when I asked about his work. It was the kind of meticulous record-keeping that had once kept convoys alive in combat zones. Now it was keeping me sane. When Daniel called to check in, I told him about the photocopy, about Richard's evasions. His voice was steady. "You need to contact the FBI, Claire. This is no longer speculation. It is a forged signature on a financial document. That is federal territory." I hesitated. The thought of federal agents knocking on Richard's door, of the boy watching his father questioned, made my chest ache. I thought of Margaret, of her belief that Richard could hold the family together. But loyalty to my sister's memory could not extend to protecting lies, so I made the call. My hands trembled as I dialed the number Daniel had given me, the local field office. The agent who answered spoke with calm authority, asking precise questions. My full name, my background, the nature of the forgery, the connection to Richard. I laid it all out, each detail clipped and clear, the way I had been trained to brief superiors. When I finished, there was silence on the line for a moment. Then the agent said, "Ms. Donovan, you did the right thing. We will open a preliminary inquiry. Do not confront him further. Keep records. If more documents surface, contact us immediately." Relief and dread warred inside me. Relief that I was no longer alone, dread of what would come next. The machinery of federal investigation is slow but relentless. Once it begins, it does not stop until truth or guilt is uncovered. The following weeks passed with a strange duality. On the surface, life looked the same. I still cooked dinners, still helped with homework, still clapped at baseball games. But beneath the routine, everything had shifted. I was no longer just a sister keeping promises. I was a soldier on a new battlefield, one where the enemy wore familiar clothes and smiled across the dinner table. Richard must have sensed something. He grew more guarded, more polished in his answers. Sometimes he looked at me with an expression I could not read, a mix of calculation and irritation. But but he never confronted me directly. Perhaps he thought I would stay silent, that my loyalty would keep me bound. He did not understand that loyalty to truth ran deeper than loyalty to blood. One night, as I tucked the boy into bed, he asked if I would always be there. His eyes searched mine, wide with the kind of fear children carry when they sense adults are hiding storms from them. I smoothed his hair and told him yes, I would always stand by him. It was not just comfort, it was a vow. Down the hall, I heard Richard's phone buzz again, another late-night call he took in clipped tones. I closed the boy's door gently and leaned against the wall, my heart pounding. I knew then that the path ahead would not be easy, but I also knew this. I had faced darker nights in deserts far from home. I had survived them by clinging to discipline, by holding the line. I would do the same here. The forged signature was only the beginning. I could feel it in my bones. There were more layers, more lies waiting to surface. And when they did, I would be ready, because this was not just about me anymore. It was about Margaret's memory, about protecting her son, about ensuring that the truth did not get buried under the weight of deception. As I closed my logbook that night, pen poised over the last line, I wrote the words that would guide me through the battles ahead. Hold the line. And with that, I knew chapter 1 of this new war had ended. The next would begin with federal agents at my door and the fight for my name truly underway. When you have lived your life by discipline, you know the sound of an arrival that changes everything. For me, it was not helicopters in the desert or convoys grinding through dust. It was the knock on my front door on a crisp Friday morning. 3 sharp raps, firm but not aggressive. I opened the door to find 2 men and a woman standing there, suits crisp, badges visible. The taller of the 2 men introduced himself first. Special Agent Thomas Rivera, Federal Bureau of Investigation. His voice carried the authority of someone used to being listened to, but there was something steady in his eyes that made me trust him almost instantly. He gestured to his colleagues, Special Agent Laura Chen and Analyst Marcus Green. Together, they looked like the kind of team you would want on your side in a crisis. I stepped aside and let them in. My living room suddenly felt smaller. The air charged with a gravity I had felt only in briefing rooms before deployment. Rivera glanced at the photographs on my mantle, the folded flag from my service, the baseball trophy my nephew had won last spring. He nodded slightly, as if taking in the whole of my life in one sweep before turning back to me. Ms. Donovan, he said, his tone measured. We have reviewed the material you submitted. The forged signature tied to your name has appeared not once, but 3 times in the past 18 months. All connected to real estate transactions involving your brother-in-law, Richard Hale. The room tilted slightly around me. I had braced for one forgery, perhaps a handful of questionable papers, but 3 times, my name used as a rubber stamp to prop up lies. My knees wanted to buckle, but I forced myself to remain standing, spine straight. Old habits, Rivera continued. This falls under federal jurisdiction because the properties cross state lines and involve significant sums. We have reason to believe Mr. Hale is part of a larger laundering operation. We also know this scheme has a pattern. He seeks out widows, divorced women, or relatives of veterans. He uses their trust to push through documents, sometimes with consent, sometimes without. In your case, he saw your military record and knew it would make the paperwork appear unimpeachable. I sat slowly on the couch, my fingers interlaced tightly in my lap. Every word felt like another blow, yet each one brought clarity. The puzzle pieces I had been juggling fell into place, forming a picture darker than I had dared imagine. Richard had not simply forged my name. He had chosen me because of my service, because the integrity I had fought for could be weaponized against me. Agent Chen spoke next, her voice calm but firm. We want to show you copies of the transactions. She slid a folder across the coffee table. Inside were photocopies of deeds, contracts, notarized statements, and there it was again, my name, my forged signature, over and over. Tied to properties I had never stepped foot in. My throat constricted. He used me, I whispered. He used Margaret's trust, and then he used mine. Rivera's gaze softened. We have seen this pattern before. Men like Hale exploit the credibility of women tied to service. A clean record is gold to them. It makes dirty money look clean. But you are not alone in this, Ms. Donovan. You came forward. That makes you different from the others. The weight of his words settled heavy. different, because I had chosen to fight instead of burying my head in denial, but also because this battle was just beginning. I thought of Margaret. Her last words to me had been about holding the family together. How cruel that the man she trusted had been tearing it apart in secret. I looked at the agents and felt the familiar pull of duty. Not duty to Richard, not even to family, but to truth. Rivera leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. We will need your cooperation, full transparency. Any documents, any conversations, any suspicions, do not confront him further. We will monitor, we will gather evidence. Your role is to remain steady, disciplined, and keep yourself safe. His words echoed Daniel's counsel. Discipline, the one weapon I had always trusted. I nodded slowly. You will have my full cooperation, but I need one thing in return. My nephew must not be hurt in this. He is innocent. Rivera's expression softened again. We understand. We will protect him. This investigation is about Hale, not the boy. Relief mingled with dread. At least they understood what mattered most. For the next hour, we went through details. They asked about Richard's routines, his business contacts, the envelopes I had seen arrive at the house. They asked if I remembered phone calls, names, numbers. I gave them everything I had recorded in my logbook, each line inked with precision. Rivera praised my records, saying they would strengthen the case. When they finally left, the house felt too quiet, like the silence after artillery fire. I sat alone on the couch, staring at the folder of forged documents. My signature repeated again and again like a cruel joke. Yet beneath the anger and sorrow, a new current stirred. Resolve. I had not chosen this battle, but I would fight it the same way I had fought others, with discipline, with loyalty to truth, and with the knowledge that no matter how dark it became, I would not break. 2 days after their first visit, Rivera asked me to meet him at the local field office. The building itself was plain, all glass and gray stone, the kind you could drive past without noticing. Inside, however, every detail reminded me of command centers I had known overseas. The quiet efficiency, the hum of controlled urgency, the sense that lives were being measured and weighed in every office. Rivera led me into a conference room. A screen lit up with names and photographs, lines connecting them like strands in a spider's web. At the center of one cluster sat Richard Hale. Around him, women's faces appeared, some middle-aged, some elderly, some with children clinging to their sides in faded photographs. These are the others, Rivera said quietly. Widows of veterans, divorced spouses of service members, women with credibility in their communities. He sought them out, gained their trust, then attached their names to property transactions. In some cases, they signed willingly, not realizing the true nature of the documents. In others, the signatures were forged. Each time, the presence of a military connection gave the deal a veneer of honor. It kept auditors from asking too many questions. I studied the faces on the screen. They could have been neighbors, church friends, women I might have shared coffee with after Sunday service. There was nothing extraordinary about them except the quiet strength in their eyes. That strength had been weaponized by men like Richard, twisted into camouflage for greed. My stomach churned. Margaret's voice came back to me, her last plea that I hold the family together. She had trusted Richard to protect her boy, yet he had been building this deception long before she died. The betrayal cut in layers. Not only had he used me, he had desecrated her memory. Rivera must have seen the storm on my face. He spoke gently but firmly. Ms. Donovan, men like Hale choose carefully. They calculate who will shield them best. In your case, your service record, your spotless reputation, your status as a veteran sister, all of it made you an ideal cover. He assumed you would never question. He underestimated you. His words steadied me. I had faced enemies who underestimated me before, in Iraq. Insurgents had mistaken me for someone who could be intimidated. They learned quickly that discipline is not weakness. Now Richard had made the same mistake. I drew a slow breath. What happens next? Rivera exchanged a glance with Chen, then replied, "We monitor, we gather evidence, we place surveillance on Hale's business, but we also need you. You are already on the paperwork. That means you are positioned as a witness of credibility. If you cooperate fully, you can help us unravel his network." The weight of that truth pressed down on me. I had not asked to be in this war. Yet here I was, my name already entangled, my integrity already tested. I thought of Margaret's boy, of the way he had asked if I would always be there. I thought of the women on that screen, their trust twisted into cover for corruption. My choice was clear. I will cooperate, I said. I will give you everything I have, but you need to understand something. I will not be reckless. I will not put the boy in danger, and I will not dishonor my sister's memory. This is about justice, not vengeance. Rivera nodded. That is exactly why we need you. Discipline is rare in cases like this. It keeps people alive. Over the next weeks, the FBI began their quiet watch. They installed discreet monitoring on Richard's business accounts, placed agents near his office, and tracked his phone calls when legally permitted. I became both participant and observer, my life split between routine and covert vigilance. I cooked dinners, folded laundry, cheered at baseball games. Then, when the house was quiet, I sent encrypted emails to Agent Chen, forwarding notes from my logbook. The duality was exhausting. Some nights I lay awake listening to Richard's footsteps pacing in his study, wondering what lies he was weaving into the night. Other nights I sat on the porch, the cool air steadying me while I whispered silent promises to Margaret that I would not let her down. One evening, Rivera met me at a diner off the highway. He slid into the booth across from me, his presence filling the space like a shield. He showed me a file discreetly angled away from the waitress refilling our coffee. We intercepted communications, he said quietly. Hale is planning another transaction, larger than the previous ones. He intends to use your name again. This time the property is across state lines, which elevates the federal charge. We need to let him proceed, but we will be watching. A chill ran down my spine, my name again. My integrity once more dangled like bait in waters crawling with predators. The old soldier in me rose, spine straightening. You want me to stay quiet? Rivera nodded. For now, if we move too soon, he slips away. But if he uses your name again, we will have undeniable proof of intent. Forgery, wire fraud, laundering, we will lock him down. I clenched my hands under the table, fighting the urge to march home and confront Richard face to face. But I remembered Daniel's counsel, remembered Rivera's words. Discipline keeps people alive. Recklessness destroys missions. I forced myself to breathe, slow and measured. I will stay quiet, I said finally, but you better be ready when the moment comes. Rivera gave a thin smile. We will be. As I drove home that night, the headlights cut tunnels through the dark. My reflection in the windshield looked older, wearier, but fiercer too. This was no longer just survival. This was battle, not with weapons of steel, but with truth, patience, and the kind of courage that grows in silence. At home, I found the boy asleep on the couch, his homework scattered across the coffee table. I draped a blanket over him and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. His innocence reminded me why I could not falter. Richard's choices had already cast shadows across too many lives. I would not let them consume the boy's. Later, as I wrote in my logbook, I paused at the last line and considered what to record. My pen hovered before I wrote the words that carried me through deployments and losses alike. Mission first. Hold the line. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the steady beat of resolve drown out the fear. I was no longer simply a target or a pawn. I was a witness, and a witness can change the course of a battle. The war was far from over, but I had accepted my role. Richard had forged my name to build a false cover. Now I would use my real name to tear his cover apart. The folder Rivera left with me sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I dared open it again. I had learned in war zones that sometimes the most dangerous weapon was not a bullet or a bomb, but information. Once you saw it, you could not unsee it. And this folder was heavy with the kind of truth that could break a heart. When I finally flipped it open, I found statements, bank records, and timelines neatly laid out. Red ink circled key deposits and withdrawals. Some of them dated back to years before Margaret's illness. I traced the columns, my stomach twisting as I realized the pattern. Each time Margaret had called me in tears, worrying about bills or tuition or the mortgage, a week later she would call again with relief in her voice. She would say Richard had managed something, had pulled through for them. At the time, I had believed it was luck or hustle, now in black and white. I saw it for what it was, dirty money flowing through clean accounts. I remembered one call as if it were yesterday, Margaret's voice raw with despair. Claire, I don't know what we're going to do. The bank is calling. The tuition office says they can't hold our payment any longer. I can't lose the house, not with the boy still in school. I had clenched the phone in my tent thousands of miles away, the desert wind rattling the canvas walls. I promised her I would send money, that I would do everything in my power to keep her afloat. She cried softly and whispered, "I don't know how, but Richard says he can fix it. He says he'll take care of us." At the time I thought it was pride, that she was reluctant to accept too much help from me. Now I understood it was something else. Richard had delivered money enough to stave off the wolves at the door, but the source was rotten. Margaret had believed in him, believed in his ability to make things work. She never knew the cost. Rivera explained it in clinical terms when we met again. She wasn't complicit, Claire. That is important. She benefited without awareness. The funds were laundered through Richard's shell companies and passed off as legitimate income. Many spouses never question when a partner suddenly produces money. They want to believe stability has returned. I pressed my palms flat on the table, struggling to breathe evenly. My sister, who had spent nights counting every dollar, who had swallowed her pride to let me send checks from overseas, had unknowingly built her relief on money that could have landed her in prison had she signed the wrong line. The betrayal was layered. Richard had not only forged my name, he had poisoned Margaret's last years with false miracles. She had clung to hope that her husband was providing, when in truth he was dragging her deeper into a pit. That night, alone in my room, I let the grief rise like a tide. I clutched a photograph of Margaret, her smile gentle, her eyes tired but warm. I whispered into the silence, "You didn't know, you couldn't have known. He tricked you too." My tears blurred the edges of the frame. I thought about the day she died, the relief in her final words. She had believed she left her son in steady hands, and I had believed it too because I wanted to. Because love has a way of smoothing over cracks until they become chasms. Now those cracks cut deep into me. I could not go back and protect her, but I could make sure her memory was not tarnished. The next morning I called Rivera. My voice was steady though my hands shook. "Agent Rivera, I need you to understand something. My sister died believing in him. She died thinking he was her savior. I cannot change that, but I can promise you this. I will not let his lies stain her legacy any longer. Use me however you need to. I will not falter." There was silence on the line, then Rivera's voice, low and firm. "That's exactly the strength we see in you, Claire. You're not just a witness, you're the anchor of this case." After I hung up, I opened my logbook and wrote Margaret's name at the top of a clean page. Beneath it, I wrote one line: "He will not use her again." Grief has a strange rhythm. It ebbs and flows, and sometimes just when you think you have steadied yourself, another wave strikes. The revelations about Margaret's finances were that kind of wave. I had always thought I knew the outlines of her life, even when I was half a world away on deployment. We talked nearly every week, wrote letters when I could, and shared all the details sisters share. But looking at the FBI's records, I realized I had only known the surface. Beneath it ran a river of manipulation that none of us had seen. Rivera met me again a few days later. We sat in a quiet office, blinds drawn against the afternoon light. He laid out another folder, this one heavier than the last. Inside were case files of other women who had crossed Richard's path. Widows of veterans, divorced spouses raising children alone, women with trust in their hearts and too much on their shoulders. One file showed a widow in Kentucky who had lost her husband to cancer after years of service. She had signed papers Richard presented, believing she was co-signing for a modest property investment that would secure her retirement. In reality, her name had been used to funnel funds through 3 shell companies. She only discovered the truth when tax notices began arriving. Another file detailed a woman in Texas, divorced from a Marine. Richard had befriended her, even helped pay off her car loan. Later, when he asked her to witness a transaction, she complied, grateful for his help. Her name ended up on property deeds tied to money wired from overseas accounts. Rivera pointed to the pattern. "Do you see, Claire? This is not random. He seeks out women tied to service. He leverages the trust and credibility that comes with military connections. You were not just unlucky, you were targeted." I studied the photographs, my chest tightening. Each woman looked ordinary, tired, but dignified, the way Margaret had looked in her last years. None of them had asked for this. None had known the price of their trust. For a long moment, I could not speak. I thought of Margaret telling me through tears that Richard had found a way. I thought of her relief, the way she had clung to hope as if it were a lifeline. She had not known that the rope was fraying, that the man she leaned on was cutting strands away with every deal. Finally, I found my voice, raw but steady. She believed in him, and I believed in her. That love blinded me. I ignored the signs. The sudden payments, the way he always had a solution at the last second. I should have asked more questions. Rivera shook his head. Don't put that on yourself. You were deployed, serving your country. You supported her in every way you could. He engineered this, not you. Still, guilt coiled in my chest. Soldiers are trained to notice details, to read terrain, to anticipate ambush. How had I missed the ambush laid inside my own family? That night I sat at my kitchen table with Margaret's photograph. I spoke aloud, as if she could hear me across whatever distance lay between this world and the next. You were caught in his web and you never knew. You died thinking he saved you, but I see it now. I see it all. And I swear to you I won't let him use your name, your memory, or your son ever again. The words settled in me like stone, heavy but solid. They were not just comfort, they were a vow. The next morning I added a new section to my logbook. I titled it Margaret. Under it I recorded every instance I could remember of her sudden financial rescues, every moment when Richard had swooped in with an answer. It was painful work, reliving her desperation and hope, but it gave me clarity. Patterns emerged. Dates matched the suspicious deposits in the FBI files. What had once felt like miracles revealed themselves as links in a chain of laundering. When I handed those notes to Rivera, he studied them carefully. This is good. It strengthens the timeline. It shows that Hale's pattern wasn't isolated to strangers. He did this to his own family. That will weigh heavily in court. The idea of a courtroom made my pulse quicken. I imagined Richard sitting there, his smooth facade cracking under evidence. I imagined Margaret's story told in full, the truth laid bare for all to see. And I imagined myself on the stand, sworn to tell the truth, my voice carrying not only my own testimony but hers as well. One evening, as I tucked my nephew into bed, he asked a question that pierced me. Aunt Claire, did Dad really take care of Mom when she was sick, or was that just what he said? I froze, my heart aching. He was old enough to sense the undercurrents, young enough to still crave reassurance. I smoothed the blanket over him and chose my words carefully. Your mom loved you more than anything in this world. She believed she was safe, and that was what gave her peace. That love was real. Remember that. The rest we will face together. He nodded, sleepy eyes heavy, and soon drifted off. But his question lingered. Children deserve the truth, but they also deserve protection. My job now was to walk that narrow line, shielding him while honoring Margaret's memory. The turning point for me came the following week. Rivera called with news that Richard was preparing another transaction, larger than before. They would let it proceed under surveillance, but they needed my cooperation. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange calm wash over me. The fear was still there, the grief still raw, but beneath it all was clarity. Love had once blinded me. I had wanted so badly to believe in Margaret's happiness, in Richard's supposed devotion, that I had looked away from cracks in the foundation. No longer, now my eyes were open. I closed my logbook and whispered into the silence, "This ends with me." I imagined Margaret's face, her smile soft and trusting. I imagined the women in those case files, their lives shaken but still standing. And I imagined the boy growing into a man who would know the truth of his family's story, not the lie. The path ahead was uncertain. There would be courtrooms, testimonies, cross-examinations. Richard would fight to keep his mask intact, but I had made my choice. I would walk into that fire with discipline, with truth as my weapon. Because some battles are not fought on foreign soil. Some battles are fought in the quiet rooms of our own homes, in the choices we make to protect those who cannot protect themselves. And this battle, the one Richard thought he could win by forging my name, would end with my vow. He would never again use Margaret's memory. He would never again stain the honor of the family she loved. I would see to that. The federal courthouse in Atlanta stood tall and austere, its stone walls looming as if carved to hold the weight of justice. I had walked through fortified compounds overseas. I had entered command posts thick with tension, but nothing quite prepared me for the gravity of that building. This was not a battlefield with sand underfoot and helicopters overhead. This was a battlefield of words and evidence where the stakes were not territory but truth. Inside, the air was cool, humming with whispers and shuffling papers. Journalists lingered in the hallway, cameras slung over their shoulders. I walked past them with my head high, though inside my stomach twisted. My name was not in the headlines, not yet, but Richard's was, and I knew once I took the stand, my voice would be recorded, quoted, dissected. Rivera met me outside the courtroom, his presence steady as ever. "Remember, Claire," he said quietly, "this is just another mission. State the facts. Keep your bearing, we will handle the rest." I nodded, my fingers tightening around the folder in my hands. Inside were the notes I had kept, the letters Margaret had written, the copies of transfers I had sent from bases overseas to help her keep the lights on. Each page was more than evidence. It was a record of love, sacrifice, and betrayal. When the trial began, the courtroom filled with the sound of formality. The judge entered, the attorneys stood, the charges were read aloud. Richard sat at the defense table in a crisp suit, his expression calm, almost smug. For a moment I saw the man Margaret had once trusted, the charming smile, the practiced ease. But then I remembered the files, the forged signatures, the women whose lives he had twisted. My chest tightened, but my resolve only deepened. The prosecution laid out its case first, laundering funds through shell companies, forging signatures to mask transactions, using widows and military families as shields to make dirty money look clean. Each point struck like artillery fire, precise and devastating. Rivera took the stand to explain the investigative trail, his voice steady as he described the forged documents bearing my name. When it was my turn, I walked to the witness stand, each step echoing in my ears. I swore the oath, my right hand raised, and sat down with my folder before me. The prosecutor began gently, asking about my service, my relationship to Margaret, and the ways I had supported her from afar. I described the letters I wrote from Iraq, the checks I mailed, the promise I had made never to let her fall. Then I laid out the truth. I had never signed the contracts. I had never been present at the closings. My signature was forged, my name stolen. I handed over copies of my personal records, showing the exact times I had been deployed or working stateside, proving I could not have been in the offices where those papers were signed. The defense attorney rose for cross-examination, his eyes sharp, his tone edged with insinuation. Ms. Donovan, you say you never signed these documents, yet your name appears repeatedly. Are we to believe that a woman of your intelligence and training would not notice her own involvement in large financial transactions? I kept my voice calm. You are to believe the truth. I never signed them. I never saw them until the bank sent me a notice. I have spent my life in service to this country. I know the weight of my signature. I do not put it on lies. He pressed harder. Is it not possible that you agreed to help your brother-in-law in private, that you signed something without fully reading it and are now embarrassed by the outcome? The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. My hands gripped the edge of the stand, steadying myself the way I once steadied rifles on outposts. No, it is not possible. I have never signed a document without reading it. My training would not allow it, and I did not sign these. The evidence will show that. The prosecutor stood and handed the judge a packet. Inside was the expert handwriting analysis. The signatures on the contracts did not match my true hand. The slope, the pressure, the spacing, they were counterfeits. The analyst's report was clear, forged beyond doubt. Rivera's testimony followed. He described the timeline of my deployments, corroborated by military records, showing I had been on base or overseas at the exact moments these contracts were supposedly signed. He turned to the jury and delivered words that still echo in my memory. Claire Donovan is not just a witness. She is proof that a soldier's honor cannot be forged. Her integrity was stolen on paper, but the truth stands here in this courtroom. The words pierced me, not as flattery, but as vindication. For months, I had carried the fear that the stain of Richard's lies would seep into my own record. Now the truth was spoken plainly, carved into the official record. As the day closed, I walked out of the courthouse into the fading sun. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but their noise felt distant. What mattered was the steady beat in my chest, the quiet certainty that I had spoken the truth, held the line, and honored Margaret's memory. Yet the trial was not over. Richard's defense still had tricks to play, and the days ahead would test me further. The next morning, the courthouse seemed even colder, as though the marble halls themselves anticipated conflict. I arrived early, seated in the gallery before the session began. Richard was already at the defense table, conferring with his attorney. He glanced my way, his expression calculated, almost pitying, as if I were a naive soldier stumbling into a battle I did not understand. I held his gaze for a long moment, unflinching. He had taken enough from me already. He would not take my resolve. The defense wasted no time launching their strategy. Their attorney paced before the jury, voice measured, suggesting doubt where there was none. He painted Richard as a businessman in over his head, a widower grieving his wife, a man who had relied too heavily on trusted family. He insinuated that if Margaret were alive, she would confirm Richard's innocence. It was a blade twisted with cruelty, using my sister's memory as a shield. When the attorney turned to me again during cross-examination, his words dripped with feigned sympathy. Ms. Donovan, I can only imagine the pain of losing your sister. Is it possible in your grief that your recollection of these financial matters is colored, that perhaps you are seeing betrayal where there was none? I felt the blood rise in my face but kept my tone even. Grief does not change facts. Documents were forged. Money was laundered. And my name was used without my knowledge. Those are not perceptions. They are truths. He leaned closer, voice low, as if confiding to the jury. But you admit you sent money to your sister for years. You admit you trusted Richard to manage household affairs in your absence. How then can you be certain you never authorized him in some way? I lifted the folder of my records, my voice firm, because I kept every letter, every transfer slip, every deployment order. There is no authorization, there is no oversight, there is only forgery. The prosecutor rose swiftly. Objection asked and answered. The judge nodded, sustaining. The attorney returned to his seat, but not without casting a final look of contempt in my direction. Over the next hours, the defense tried every tactic, questioning the accuracy of handwriting experts, implying the FBI targeted Richard unfairly, even hinting at conspiracies of jealous business rivals. But each time, evidence weighed heavier than their words. Property records traced shell companies back to Richard's accounts. Bank transfers revealed patterns timed with his so-called miraculous rescues of Margaret's finances. And the testimony of other women, widows, divorcees, women he had exploited, stacked like bricks in a wall too high for him to scale. When closing arguments came, the defense pleaded for sympathy, framing Richard as a man undone by grief and bad judgment, not criminal intent. But the prosecution's summation cut through that fog. This case is not about grief. It is about greed. It is about a man who forged the name of a soldier, knowing her honor would shield his crimes. It is about women misled and exploited because their trust was seen as weakness. And it is about the truth that stood unshaken, even when tested by lies. The truth is Claire Donovan never signed those documents. The truth is Richard Hale did, and the law requires that he be held accountable. The jury left to deliberate, and the hours stretched long. I sat outside on a bench, staring at the seal of the court engraved above the doors. My thoughts drifted to Margaret. I pictured her at the kitchen table, late at night, believing Richard had saved them again, not knowing the cost. For a moment my grief threatened to break me, but then I steadied my breath. She had lived in hope, I would live in truth. When the jury filed back, their faces were solemn, their verdict sealed in the foreman's hands. The clerk read the words slowly, each syllable echoing. On the charge of wire fraud, guilty. On the charge of money laundering, guilty. On the charge of forgery of federal documents, guilty. Richard sat still, his jaw clenched, the mask cracking at last. The courtroom seemed to exhale all at once, whispers rising like a tide. The judge's sentence followed weeks later, but the impact was no less sharp. 12 years in federal prison, restitution ordered to the women whose lives he had entangled. It was not enough to erase the harm, but it was justice, measured and real. As the gavel fell, I closed my eyes. The sound was final, the way a door closes behind you when you step into new ground. Walking out of the courthouse, the air felt lighter than it had in months. Reporters clustered at the steps, questions flying, but I moved past them. I had no appetite for headlines. This story did not belong to the press. It belonged to Margaret, to the women Richard had exploited, and to the nephew who would grow up knowing the truth. Rivera joined me outside, his expression softened with respect. You held the line, Claire. Not many could have done what you did. I shook his hand. I only did what was right. The uniform may be gone, but the duty remains. He nodded, understanding without another word. Later, when I returned home, I sat again at my kitchen table with Margaret's photograph, the same place I had once wept over the betrayal. Now I felt something different. Not victory, never that. Justice is not a triumph so much as a setting right. A leveling of scales, what I felt was release. I spoke softly, the words for her alone. It's over, Margaret. He can't use you anymore. He can't use me. We are free of him. Tears slipped down my cheeks, but this time they carried no shame, no confusion, only truth. My nephew sat at the table with me, older now, his eyes searching. "So it's finished?" he asked. I took his hand, squeezing gently. "It's finished in the way that matters. He will pay for what he did, and we will live in the light of the truth. That's what your mom would want." He nodded, and in his eyes I saw something I had not seen before: peace. That night, as I turned out the lights, I thought of all the women whose names had been forged, whose trust had been stolen. I thought of the weight soldiers carry, not only in combat zones, but in living rooms and courtrooms, in the quiet choices of honor. And I thought of the choice I had made. Speak when silence would have been easier. To face betrayal head-on rather than look away. To honor my sister not with denial but with truth. In the end, it was not the sentence that gave me peace. It was the decision to stand, to testify, to protect the dignity of those who could not protect themselves. That was the soldier's way, the only way I knew. I had lost my last piece of family in Richard's fall, but I had kept something greater. I had kept my honor, and Margaret's too. And as I looked out at the night sky, stars glinting like distant metals, I whispered the words that closed this battle once and for all. I chose the truth, I chose honor, and I would choose it again. There are battles we train for, the ones fought with rifles and radios, the ones marked by sandstorms and sweat. But there are other battles no one prepares you for. They happen in quiet kitchens, in courthouses, in the spaces we thought were safe. They cut deeper because they come from within our own families, from the people we should have been able to trust most. I once believed my hardest days ended when I folded my uniform for the last time. But life taught me otherwise. I learned that war can reach into your home without warning, not with bombs, but with lies. And when that happens, you do not choose the fight. You choose only how you will stand in it. Discipline was the gift the army gave me. Integrity was the promise I swore to keep. In court, with Richard sitting only feet away, I understood what those words truly meant. Integrity is not blind loyalty. It is not turning away from hard truths. Integrity is the courage to cut through deceit, even when it costs you the little family you have left. I think often of Margaret. I remember her laughter in the kitchen, the way she tucked her son's hair behind his ear, the way she whispered that I was her rock. She never knew the full truth about Richard, and in some ways I am grateful for that. She left this world believing in love, and that is not a belief I would ever want to take from her. But I also know she believed in me. In the discipline and honesty that shaped my life, that was the promise I kept. One evening, after the trial was over, I lit a single candle in front of her photograph. The room was quiet, my nephew asleep down the hall. I whispered to her, my voice steady but soft, "Rest easy now." I protected the thing you always trusted me to guard, the truth. I stood when it mattered most. The flame flickered, steady and bright. In that light, I felt her presence, not in grief, but in peace. For the first time in years, I felt peace too. This story is not just about me. It is about every veteran who comes home and finds that the fight is not over. It is about the hidden battles for integrity, for dignity, for the safety of those we love. And it is about the strength it takes to choose honor when the easier choice would be silence. If this story reached you, if it stirred something in your heart, I ask you to take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who may need the reminder that courage does not always wear a uniform. Sometimes it sits quietly in a courtroom. Sometimes it whispers truth to a photograph late at night. And sometimes it belongs to veterans still fighting, not only for our country, but for honesty and love.